Hello and welcome to this video. In this video we're going to get our environment ready for coding our backtesting system and bot. Now I said in a previous video that I was going to make the assumption that you've been able to install Python and get Visual Studio Code up and running. I'll just reiterate that once more. I'm on the website of Visual Studio Code here. There's this Python Hello World tutorial, if you haven't looked already, that explains how to install Python with Visual Studio Code. So you should be at the stage that if you type Python -- version in your console, you'll get something like I've got Python 3.8 or 3.9 or 3.10 or anything above 3.4 will be okay. If you're using a Linux or a Mac, you might have Python 2 installed as well, in which case you'll see a version of 2 point something. And that means for these commands, you're going to need to use Python 3 and then -- version. But you must be using Python 3 to get all of this to work. The next thing is you'll need to make yourself somewhere on your computer a directory where you want to actually type your code. I'll leave you to do that and assume that's fairly straightforward. And I've opened up a command prompt here in a directory where I'm going to be writing the code for this video. And I'd like you to open a command prompt and navigate also to the directory where you've made your folder for your code. And what we're going to do inside here is we're going to create what's known as a virtual environment. Now, virtual environments can be quite confusing when you first start using Python. They were for me. And in case you're not already aware of what they are, I have here the directory for my Python installation. Depending on what OS you're using and how you've installed Python, yours could be somewhere else and look a bit different. But every time we run the Python command and execute a script or something, what happens is the Python interpreter runs, so this python.exe, reads in our scripts and then uses various things that come with Python to execute your program. And you'll see that we've got sort of a scripts directory in here with something called pip, which we're going to be using. There's libraries, all sorts of libraries and packages and things here, one called venv that we're going to be using as well. So Python comes as an entity, as a program which interprets your code and then does whatever your code says it should do. And Python is a great language because it's, in terms of syntax, it's very, very short. You can do a lot with little code, and it comes with a lot of libraries that already do a lot of stuff for you. Now, when it comes to using these libraries, we're going to need to install them. And this is where virtual environments come in. So we could install these libraries. I'll just go back to the directory. We could install these libraries in our original Python installation. So we would add things into this lib folder. But over time, as you do more and more projects, you'll find this starts to balloon with all sorts of libraries and then different versions of the same thing, and it starts to get very, very confusing. At first it doesn't, but after a while, particularly when you go into machine learning and things like this, you'll actually want to keep the extra things you've installed for a particular project separate from other projects. Otherwise you end up with an enormous Python installation. So a neat way around this is to create what are called virtual environments. And essentially what happens is a copy of all this is made and we'll place it in a folder inside our project folder. And then when we install the libraries and things that we want to use for our project, they'll be installed in that folder and we'll use that copy of Python rather than the nice clean original one we have here. And that means every new project we can make a new virtual environment, and that's contained on its own and things don't get messy later on. Now Python 3.5 and upwards, I think, which you should have if you've installed Python, comes already with a library called venv supplied with it, and it's this library that we're going to use to create our virtual environment. So I'm inside my code directory here, and to create it I'm going to type python -m venv venv. So what's happening here? Well, here I'm asking Python to do something, and remember, if you've got Python 2 you might need to type Python 3 here instead of just Python on its own. The -m says I'm going to use a module. That module is called venv, so that we saw it in the lib folder, and I want to create my virtual environment in a folder that I'm going to call venv. So I press enter. And after a little bit of a pause, if I type dir, you can see that in this directory we now have a folder called venv. If I just go into that folder in the Explorer on Windows, you can see that we've got a venv folder here, and in there we've got libraries and all sorts of things that are our virtual Python installation. And this now has nothing to do with the original Python installation that we had. So what we need to do now to use this virtual environment is we need to be able to activate it. And this is slightly different on Linux and a Mac to Windows, but the way you do it on Windows is to type venv scripts and activate and press enter. And we can see that we have venv in brackets on the left-hand side of the path here. That indicates that we're now using the virtual environment rather than our original installation of Python. Incidentally, if you're using a Mac or Linux, my guess is you know how to do this, but you need to type source venv and then /bin and /activate and exactly the same thing will happen. The syntax is just slightly different. So we're going to use something called pip to actually install the libraries that we're going to need to use as part of our project. And pip is a package manager for Python. The first thing we're going to install is something called requests, because we're going to be making HTTP requests to the Oanda API. To do this, I'm going to type pip install. Now, if you don't have admin access to your current machine, you'll need to type --user here. If you do, then you can leave it out. That just means if you haven't got admin access, pip will try to install at a user level. I have admin access, most people do, I assume, so we're just going to type pip install and then space and requests. Hit enter, and pip will now start downloading and installing requests. In my case, I've already got it and downloaded it. It's in a cache, so it didn't need to download anything. Yours will probably download and install it. You can ignore this upgrade warning down here. I'll just clear the screen. The next package we want to install is something called Pandas. Pandas is a large package and is the main data science package used for Python. It's extremely powerful, fast, and convenient for working with data, and we're going to be working with a lot of data. The last package I'm going to install is something called Jupyter. So Jupyter is a package that contains, amongst other things, notebooks, which are a very convenient interactive way to write Python when you're exploring data, and we'll see that later on in the course. So once you have all of this installed, we're ready to fire up Visual Studio Code. Now, if you've followed the tutorial on Visual Studio Code, you should be able to type code, space, and a dot. And Visual Studio, if I just press enter, should open up on the screen in front of you. And it should already be open in the directory that you're using for your code. If it isn't, you'll need to click Open Folder and open the folder manually. So the last thing I want to do then to complete this video is just test that we have everything up and running. In Visual Studio Code, on the left-hand side, you'll see a little icon here for extensions. If you click on that, you can search for extensions in the marketplace, and you need to make sure you've installed a couple. One of them is Python. I'll assume you already have this installed. If not, if you click on it, there'll be a green install button. I already have it installed. You need that one. And the other one we need is Jupyter. So I already have this installed as well. There's 8 million downloads. That's quite a lot. Again, please install that because we'll need this for using the notebooks. So once those extensions are installed, we can go ahead and make our first little test. So inside my code directory, you can ignore this .vs code one here. If you have one already, you might not. You'll see I've got my .env folder. I'm going to click in the empty space underneath. The one thing I dislike a bit about Visual Studio Code is it's not clear where the files are going. Do not make this next file we're going to do inside the vn folder. Get out of that, click, so you've got this blue box showing that you're at the root. Click new and we'll type test.ipynb. And what we have here is what's known as a notebook. It's an interactive way of writing Python code, and it's really, really convenient. So to test everything's up and running, first of all, down the bottom of Visual Studio Code, you can see here that I've got Python 3.8.6, but importantly, these venv in brackets. That means it's using, as the Python interpreter, my virtual environment. If I click on that, it opens this window at the top where we can select whatever environments we have on the machine. You'll see that Visual Studio Code has detected I have one in program files. That's my original Python installation. We don't want to use that. Make sure you've got your virtual environment selected. So let's make a little test that the code is actually working. We're going to type print, open brackets, and then beer. Shift and enter should execute the code in this cell, and hopefully you see beer or whatever word you've put between the speech marks. Now, if you're brand new to Python, you'll be thinking what's going on here. We're going to be doing a steep learning curve if you're brand new to Python. I'm going to explain it as we go along. Here's what's known as a function. It comes built into Python in this case, and it does what it says on the tin. If you type print, open and close some brackets, and in between those brackets, put some speech marks. It can be single or double, and then some letters in between. That's known as a string or a word. And what will happen is to the standard output, which will be the console if you're in a console, or in the notebook, it's in the notebook, it will print whatever you put between these curly brackets, which in our case is beer. I can change this to a more bog standard hello, and we'll see hello if I press shift and enter. And the reason you might ask yourself, why are we using this notebook with what are known as cells here that we type the code in? Well, it's a good interactive, convenient way to start analyzing data and exploring data, as you'll see later on, before we then move to writing fully fledged scripts. The other thing to note is if I press shift and enter, you'll see that in the square brackets here I get a 3. If I do it and execute again, I get a 4. When you execute code inside notebooks, you get the order that it was executed in a little square bracket here. And that's really important because I could execute something here. Let's say I just print the number 4, and you can see that's the 5th statement executed. I can go back up to here, and now that's the 6th. The order that the code is in the cells here in this notebook doesn't matter for what's happening with your program, and that's one really important thing to know. And when you've got hundreds and hundreds of cells, you can end up getting a little bit lost, so it's always good to keep an eye on these numbers. If I select a whole cell here just by clicking underneath the number so it goes blue and double tap D, I delete the cell. Now what I'd like to test is that the libraries are working. So we're going to type import requests, which we've installed using pip, and just hit shift and enter. If you don't get any error, then all is good. If you do, then there's a problem installing a library. Please put a comment below the video. The other one I'm going to do is import pandas as PD and shift and enter. And again, that should execute without any error. Don't worry about the add as PD. I'm going to explain what that is later on. But assuming you've got both of these installed and working like this, that means we're ready to go with actually getting some data out of the Oando API using Python, which we'll start doing in the next video. So that's it for now. Hope that's made some sense. Any problems, please put a comment below the video. Otherwise, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.